Alright guys, we're finally back with another video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at my takes on the top 5 best bleed weapons in Elden Ring. If this is your 3rd or 4th or 5th video of mine, if you guys wouldn't mind, consider leaving a like on the video. It really helps it out a ton. But with all that out of the way, let's get into the first weapon at number 5. Starting things off with the number 5 spot, we're going to be taking a look at the REDUVIA dagger. You can get this weapon really early in the game from Bloody Figure Nigerius, right outside of Patch's Cave in Limgrave. Starting things off with the weapon itself, it is a dagger, so obviously its weapon range isn't the greatest in the world. Where this one's really going to shine is its Ash's Ward and the BLOODHOUNDS, where you can do those ranged bleeds. As you guys saw with the first throw against Radahn there, it already gets a bleed proc right off the bat. You can stack this thing up for some serious damage against pretty much any boss that isn't immune to bleed. Another really efficient way to use this weapon would be by just power stancing 2 of them together. That way you can use Millicent's Prosthesis and also the ROTWYN'S Sword Insignia for some successive attack power, because power stance daggers, the attacks come out really quickly. But for this portion of it, I just wanted to stick to just the weapon itself to kind of showcase its weapon art. Speaking of the weapon art, it can be buffed with things like Warrior Jar Shard if you were mean and decided to kill Alexander at the beginning of the game, or if you're patient and waited till Fair Missoula to get to him, you can obviously buff it with the Shard of Alexander itself. I'm going to go ahead and throw one more cast into Radahn here, and he's going to go down easy. That's going to be REDUVIA at number 5. Let's go ahead and move to the number 4 spot. Coming in at number 4, a fan favorite and also a personal favorite of mine as well, we're going to be taking a look at BLOODHOUNDS FANG. There's a reason why this weapon is used for speedruns, because it has some serious damage potential with a really low stat investment. When I'm using this weapon, I really like to throw the Blood Flame Blade incantation on it, because it adds hemorrhage and fire damage to the weapon, meaning it can be buffed by things like the Flame Grant Me Strength incantation and also the Fire Tear and also the Fire Scorpion Charm. Speaking of talismans, I do like to run the Old Lord's Talisman with this as well, just to increase the Blood Flame's duration, just making for the damage potential. And also the Shard of Alexander, stacking that on top for that extra 15% damage to the Ash of War. I do firmly believe that this weapon is the most well-rounded and easy to use weapon in the entire game. Its Ash of War is really easy to learn, and also it has the incredible Great Sword moveset. I'm sure you guys know by now that it's my favorite moveset of any weapons in the entire game. And speaking of easy, the boss that you have to fell to acquire this weapon is really simple as well. It's going to be the Bloodhound Knight Darrowell. You guys can find him in the southern side of Limgrave in an Everjail. You can make the fight even more trivial by summoning Blythe after you talk to Calais and doing the snap at the ruins where you can find Blythe, so you can turn it into a gang fight, making it even simpler for you. Moving back to the weapon itself, however, it is a somber stone weapon, so it comes with that really easy upgrade tree of just 1 stone per level. And while we're talking about somber stone weapons, every single weapon in this video is going to be a somber stone weapon. I just felt like they'd be keeping them separate from the standard smithing stone bleed weapons. We're going to be taking a look at those in the next video. And while we're rambling here, all weapons in this video are going to be featured without the white mask and also without the Lord of Blood's exaltation. I just wanted the weapons damage to shine on their own with as little buffs as possible. And to be completely honest with you guys, a lot of these weapons don't even really need those kind of buffs. Just standard stuff like the Physic and Golden Vow work perfectly fine. But we'll get to those weapons when we get to them. And real quick right here, that end of the roll from the Godskin Noble, I had no idea that it did damage. If you guys knew that, make sure you let me know in the comments. But legitimately, that's the first time I've ever been hit by that. But wrap things up with the fight itself. I'm going to go ahead and completely whiff that, but that's okay. A couple more swings here. He's going to manage to get a couple in. I really do enjoy using this weapon. I've used it for entire playthroughs, and as I've mentioned previously, it was the first weapon I killed any boss with before I even owned the game. But that's going to be BLOODHOUNDS FANG at number 4. Let's go ahead and move to number 3. Moving things along at number 3, this is going to be ELEONORA'S POLEBLADE. You guys can acquire this weapon from Bloody Finger Eleonora and Altus about the mid-church or so. After she invades you, there's a really easy cheese where you can just stand on the edge of a cliff and she'll just fall right off of it. Moving into the fight itself, starting things off with this amazing charge attack. It's probably my favorite in the game, so you're going to want to be using things like the Axe Talisman to buff those charge attacks. But where this weapon really going to shine is its successive attack power, because it is a twin blade, so you can do a lot of hits in a really short amount of time. So things like ROTWYN'S Sword Insignia or Millicent's Prosthesis are going to be really good for this weapon. Also, it does have inherent fire damage as well, so things like the Fire Scorpion Charm or the Flame Grant Me Strength incantation, or even the Fire Tear to buff its damage to really crazy heights. Where this weapon really shines is going to be against those bosses that are kind of really slow or really tanky, where they're just kind of sitting there and just letting you hit them as many times as you want. Bosses like Loretta, where they're just going to kind of bounce around and waste your time, not really good. But I was on my way to Melania, and I actually ended up getting a halfway decent fight with her, so I decided to continue with the footage anyway. When using this weapon specifically, you're probably going to be wanting to hit that 51 poise breakpoint of just where the bosses can't really stagger you out of your animations with just the lighter attacks, so you can guys just sit there and spam them down, or just use something like the Bull Goat set or even the Bull Goat's Talisman to increase your poise. Moving towards the fight itself, after her being extremely movie in phase 1, going into the phase transition in phase 2, I kind of got a little tired of it. I can be an impatient and greedy at times, but we're going to go ahead right here, and I'm just going to demonstrate this weapon's potential right here, spamming her down before the Loretta Slash can come out, but that's going to be ELEONORA'S POLEBLADE at number 3. Let's go ahead and proceed forward to the number 2 spot. Coming in at number 2, the biggest love-hate relationship weapon in the entire game, in my opinion. This is going to be Rivers of Blood. In a previous video that I did mention that this weapon is overrated. While I still do believe that to some extent, I have actually used it finally for an entire playthrough, and I do believe that it sits firmly at this number 2 spot. Especially because it is a katana, which the katanas have some of the best movesets in the entire game. And while being good as a katana, where this weapon really shines, as we all know, is its weapon art, the Corpse Piler. So if we're talking about weapon arts, we're always going to be talking about things like Shard of Alexander to boost the weapon art by 15%. Like the ELEONORA'S POLEBLADE before this weapon also has fire damage on it, so things like Fire Scorpion Charm, the Fire Tier, and the Flame Grant Me Strength incantation work really well. Millicent's Prosthesis and Rotten Wing Sword Insignia both work really well too, because this weapon does have a pretty fast moveset, so getting those successive attacks in can be pretty simple. And I wanted to demonstrate this weapon's potential against a boss that I usually have a lot of trouble with. As you guys know, I've mentioned it many times. Malekith is usually the one boss in the game for whatever reason. I just have trouble with his moveset. I know it really well, but for whatever reason, he always manages to kill me because I just get greedy on one of his attacks, even though I know exactly what's coming. Like I mentioned with ELEONORA'S POLEBLADE, this weapon works really well too against those less movier bosses where you can just stack up the bleed and the hemorrhage over time. Movier bosses like Malekith, where they're just going to dodge around or whatever, it will reset the bleed buildup, which is perfectly fine. The weapon's damage in itself is definitely worth it. After using this weapon for an entire playthrough, I do think that my mind about it has been changed. It is an excellent weapon for anyone really, veterans or beginners. I know it can be a little annoying in PvP, but my lists are usually PvE focused, so we're just going to be sticking to that side of things. All in all, I think Rivers of Blood is an excellent weapon, and honestly, I think it sits firmly as the best katana in the game. If you guys disagree with that, be sure to let me know in the comments. I'd say Moonveil would be a close second, but I don't think its damage potential is nearly there compared to Rivers of Blood, especially with how many different ways you can stack Rivers of Blood damage. And like I said, with this build specifically, no White Mask nor Lord of Blood's Exaltation, and it's really holding its own. So that's going to be Rivers of Blood at number 2. Let's go ahead and wrap things up with number 1. And wrapping things up at number 1, I'm sure you guys all saw this coming, we're going to be taking a look at MOHGWYN'S Sacred Spear. Any kind of weapon that has an AoE bleed buildup can be frickin' sane. I wanted to use this weapon against Melania specifically because it's one of the few weapons that can actually stagger her out of waterfowl, as we just saw right there. And the damage over time this thing can do to her, or even other bosses, can be absolutely incredible. With just 2 button presses here, I'm going to go ahead and completely kill her out of phase 1 and move forward to phase 2. Anything that can do that to her, I think, is well deserving of this number 1 spot. You guys can acquire this weapon by killing Mohg in MOHGWYN Palace and then going to the Round Table Hold and trading his remembrance to Enya, and she'll give you this weapon in return. Moving forward, let's look at buffs and whatnot to the weapon. So this weapon does have fire damage. I'm sure you guys see the theme between bleed weapons and fire damage. They just go hand in hand. So we're going to be talking about the Fire Scorpion Charm, the Fire Tier, and then Flame Grant Me Strength. Another really good buff for this weapon would be the Shard of Alexander, because you're primarily using that AoE, which it's going to be buffed by 15% by equipping the Shard of Alexander. And with this weapon specifically, I would highly recommend using something like the Bull Goat set or even the Bull Goat's Talisman as well to increase your poise, because as you're doing those casts, it can be really easy to be interrupted out of them, especially out of the later game bosses who have that heavier hit and they can just kind of stag you, just like Melania did to me there. And as far as button press to damage output goes, I definitely think this thing can hang out with the likes of Common Azure, Unendurable Frenzy, or even Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, because the damage return it can be absolutely incredible. And even the FP used per cast, it can be pretty minimal, so you guys don't need to dump a whole lot of points into mine, so you can put it into something else like Arcane, where it's going to scale with your bleed buildup. And I know it's really late in the video to be mentioning this, but Arcane is the primary bleed buildup stat. I'm sure you guys all knew that by now, but there might be a couple people out there who don't. So the more arcane you have, the better your bleed procs are going to be and the more frequent that they're going to happen. All in all, I think MOHGWYN'S Spear is an excellent, well-rounded weapon. While being slower than some of the other weapons on this list, I definitely think it shines at clearing out mobs or even taking down those harder bosses. And just with this Ash of War alone, I do believe it securely sits it at the #1 spot. There's no other weapon in the game really that can have this kind of AoE output with the bleed and do this amount of damage. But that's going to go ahead and take care of Malenia, and that's also going to take care of today's video. As always, I appreciate you guys coming out, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.